William Blake lived and wrote in the Romantic age. And yet, when we talk about romantic poets, why is it that he doesn't figure there? You know of Wordsworth and Coleridge and Shelley and Keats and Byron as romantic poets. And why? Because there was something which linked them together into one school of poetry. And what was that? Anytime I think of any of them, what comes to my mind is the beauty of nature, is the power of imagination, is the subjectivity, I wandered lonely as a cloud, or to me, and so on and on. Every poet talks about his reaction to the world around him, the world of nature, the beauty of nature. And what about Blake? Well, you will see as we go on, Blake was more interested in the issues of the day. And therefore, it is what we would call objective poetry. You know, almost like the poetry of the neoclassical era. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going into the history of literature. But well, as we do the poem, you will see how Blake was interested in the issues of his day. And therefore, we don't classify him as a romantic poet. William Blake, 1757 to 1827. Poet, of course, he was, but he was also a painter and a printmaker. He was not very well known during his life because some of them, the critics and his peers, co-poets of the period, almost considered him mad. You know why? Because of the mystical undercurrents in all his poems, so different from the other romantic poets of the period. Yes, he was a little idiosyncratic, and he collaborated with his wife, Catherine Boucher. Some people say, well, she taught him to paint and he taught her to write. So beautiful was their collaboration. She was a printmaker and a colorist, a word we don't use much today. What did he do? He illustrated his own works too, but he began by illustrating some lesser-known poets of that age. Among his collections of poems are the two very famous ones, the collection, Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. And interestingly, very often, many of his poems find place in both the collections. What do I mean by that? There are two versions of the same topic, which find a place in both the collections. Of course, many of us know him for his tiger poem and the lamb poem, because he says, is it the same God who created both the tiger and the lamb? But our poem today is the Chimney Sweeper, very different from the tiger and lamb poems. The poem, The Chimney Sweeper, was published in two parts, in Songs of Innocence in 1789 and in Songs of Experience in 1794. The Chimney Sweeper. I think the word itself, the title itself, does not mean much to many of us because chimneys are gone, right? We live in the age of electricity or even further. And therefore, the concept of chimneys no more exists. But some of you might remember the chimney. Oh, we still talk of the chimney in our kitchens, but that's a different kind of the chimney. But the chimney he's talking about is, it used to go up through which the smoke would go and then it would come out. And can you imagine? You needed people to go in to clean that. Okay? So actually it's it's from a chimney sweeper. Right? So the chimney sweeper speaks. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, weep, weep. So your chimneys I sweep, in soot I sleep. Very simple, Very simple rhyme scheme. But he was sold as a child. So the poem is also a commentary on that period, 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century England, when child labor was rampant. So this little boy was sold. Who was he sold to? A contractor we have for our daily wage earners today. For example, you have a contractor who takes you out to different places. So also, he was probably sold to a master sweeper who then took him to different houses to be cleaned, for the chimney to be cleaned. And I was sold even before I could cry, weep, weep, weep. I was a little boy. There's little Tom Ducker who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved. So I said, "Hush, Tom, never mind, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair." So sad, it brings tears to my eyes. There's another little child, he's called Tom Ducker, and he cried because they cut off his hair. In the cutting of the hair, the poet is probably indicating, like you shear, the wool off the sheep's back. That's how probably the child's hair is cut, because it's easier to manage if he has less hair. And how do we try to pacify, console that little boy? Don't worry, if you don't have hair, then there won't be any soot on your hair. And so he was very quiet, and that very night, as Tom was sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick and Joe, Ned and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. So you have not one, not two, but hundreds of them. Hundreds of chimney sweeper boys, and they were all laid out in coffins of black. It has to be black because it's covered with soot. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Where else can they be set free except in a dream? And who else can set them free except an angel? So she opens all the coffins, so all these little boys are free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. I can imagine that little boy is always covered with soot. What would they dream of? Getting rid of all the soot, getting rid of those bags. Those bags would have their dust cloth and their brooms and all that, with which they are saddled for life. They would leave all that behind. Remember when that angel came and opened their black coffins, and then they will sport in the sun and fly with the wind. And then the angel talks to Tom. Remember our sweeper boy. And the angel told Tom, if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. That's the pity. We try to keep all these people in control by promising them something when God would free them, when God would become their father. And then the dream ends, as all dreams have to end. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. And the poem ends with, so if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. It's almost as if there's a moral for all of us. Do your duty and you will be rewarded. No harm will come to you. Such a sad poem. Just imagine, just understand, but how it ends with a moral, with something. All of you do your jobs, do your duty, and you will be rewarded. I think that's how we get through life, whatever may be the pains, whatever may be the hardships. The poem is written in stanzas of 4 lines. 4 lines, they're called quatrains, and there are 6 of them. And it has a very, very simple kind of a rhyme scheme. You remember rhyme scheme? Young, tongue, weep, sleep. So we call that AABB. There is They rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. That's a metaphor. Remember? When there is a comparison without the use of words like and as. And you have God, the angel. When you look at all that, you see that the poet is trying to create visual symbols for us to make the poem probably easier for us to understand. There is another poem too, but that was written from the adult point of view, not from the child point of view. Hush, Tom, never mind. You know the soot cannot spoil your white hair. Imagine, that is the irony. These are children in England, and obviously they don't have black hair like you and I have. They have blonde or white, that kind of hair. Now, the soot can't spoil your hair because you don't have any hair at all. So in each line, there is a commentary. But I want us to remember that this poem is not about figures of speech. It is about drawing our attention to the life of destitution of these kids, the exploitation within society, the contrasts of those wealthy mansions and these little boys who probably don't even have a house, don't even have a home. They probably live off the streets. And that is why the poem appeals to us even after all these years. Why the poem? When someone asks me a question like that, I always think it's literature which takes me to years ago, to a period which I didn't know about. Things that happened then, people who lived then, the lives that they led. Don't you think this is one such poem? The Chimney Sweeper? Yes, of course. It is a poem filled with pathos. And what poem can be greater than that? Because after all, our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thoughts. So here is that little Tom with all his friends. So read such poems, because it is through poetry that we can live 100 lives, can't we?